Thank you for joining us for our series dedicated to the 2014 Standards for Accreditation. As part of their membership, Middle States accredited institutions must demonstrate that they meet or exceed the expectations for academic and institutional integrity and quality promoted through the 2014 Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation. This module will share the expectations relating to Standard 3, Design and Delivery of the Student Learning Experience. After viewing this video, we hope that you will become familiar with the 2014 Standards for Accreditation, be able to assess institutional compliance using the criteria from Standard 3, understand what documentation will be useful in demonstrating compliance with Standard 3, be able to articulate the role of assessment as it relates to Standard 3, and better understand the Commission's requirements of affiliation and how they relate to Standard 3. While the Commission has many relevant resources to assist you and your colleagues with demonstrating compliance with the standards and requirements of affiliation, the focus of this presentation will come from the Commission's publication, Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation, the 13th edition. You can find this on the Commission's website and download a PDF version if you do not have a hard copy. This presentation will focus on Standard 3, which you can find by turning to page 7. In total, the process for ensuring compliance relies on a determination that an institution has demonstrated that it's in compliance with the Commission's 15 Requirements of Affiliation and 7 Standards for Accreditation. Compliance with both the Requirements of Affiliation and the Standards for Accreditation is expected to be continuous. Institutions are, in most instances, comprehensively evaluated on both the Requirements of Affiliation and Standards for Accreditation at the time of their self-study evaluation. Institutions will be evaluated according to the requirements, standards, and their criteria within the context of institutional mission. This slide lists the Commission's 15 requirements of affiliation. Note that 4 of the requirements in particular, number 8, systematic evaluation of all programs, 9, student learning programs, rigor, coherence, and assessment, 10, institutional planning, and 15, core of faculty and/or other appropriate professionals, are directly related to Standard 3. Some requirements of affiliation will be addressed within the self-study document, while others may be addressed through some other compliance mechanism. This slide provides you with one recommended approach for aligning the requirements of affiliation likely to be addressed in the self-study document with the appropriate standards. This is one approach of many. However, the appropriate linkages are made between requirements of affiliation and the standards. Put another way, institutions can and will address various requirements of affiliation in the self-study report itself, as this chart demonstrates. Institutions endeavoring to demonstrate compliance with requirements of affiliation 8, 9, 10, and 15 can do so successfully by addressing them partially in a well-written, analytically based self-study section that addresses Standard 3. Let's take a look at requirements 8, 9, 10, and 15. Requirement of affiliation number 8 states that accredited institutions must engage in systematic evaluation of educational and other programs. Requirement of affiliation number 9 states that educational programs must be characterized by rigor, coherence, and appropriate assessment. Requirement of affiliation number 10 communicates the Commission's expectation that institutional planning include a consideration of student achievement of educational goals, student learning, and the results of academic and institutional assessment. Finally, requirement of affiliation 15 communicates the Commission's expectation that the institution employs qualified faculty or other appropriate professionals to assure the continuity and coherence of the educational programs. Consistent with the guiding principles of the Commission, mission-centeredness, student learning, innovation, and continuous improvement, it's important to note that both the requirements of affiliation and standards for accreditation stress that institutions are expected to demonstrate that they engage in assessment processes that regularly inform continuous quality improvement, overall institutional effectiveness, and the effective management of student learning. Institutions will need to include within their self-study materials how the criteria within each standard is met, as well as how the relevant requirement of affiliation is also met. It's important to remember, however, that when an institution demonstrates that it meets Standard 3, it must also demonstrate how it complies with these relevant requirements of affiliation. This may or may not require a separate analysis within the self-study document, but a clear indicator addressing the appropriate requirement of affiliation will be necessary. For example, some institutions will provide headings that include references to specific requirements of affiliation or have footnoted or offset notations in the margin of the self-study document to indicate that the analysis provided also speaks to and demonstrates compliance with the appropriate requirement of affiliation. While the Commission is not prescriptive in terms of how compliance is documented, institutions have to be mindful of the appropriate alignment of the requirements of affiliation with the standards and clearly indicate to the evaluation team where that has been satisfied in the self-study document. Accompanying and consistent with the requirements of affiliation are the Commission standards for accreditation. Now let's review the language and criteria of Standard 3. Standard 3. Design and delivery of the student learning experience. An institution provides students with learning experiences that are characterized by rigor and coherence at all program, certificate, and degree levels, regardless of instructional modality. All learning experiences, regardless of modality, program pace, schedule, level, and setting, are consistent with higher education expectations. The student is the primary beneficiary of an institution's educational mission, and the success of the institution is best measured by the success of its students during and after their enrollment in the institution's programs. Several points are worth noting. The standard and its criteria emphasize all settings and modalities. The standard and its criteria emphasize policies, procedures, processes, and programs. The standard and its criteria emphasize students through their life cycle with an institution. The standard and its criteria emphasize institutional mission. And finally, the standard and its criteria emphasize the quality of the learning environment and student success. Overall, this standard will require institutions to analyze the following. How can the institution demonstrate that learning experiences at the institution are characterized by rigor and coherence and consistent with higher education expectations? In what follows, the various criteria that constitute Standard 3 will be explained. This standard has a total of 8 criteria, which are noted on this and the next few slides in general terms. As you review the criteria, you and your colleagues should be thinking about resources that are available at the institution that could be relied upon to demonstrate compliance with each criterion. These can be policies, procedures, or other types of evidence that would demonstrate during review that the institution meets the criteria. Criteria 1 through 3 cover fostering a coherent student learning experience, faculty, and accurate publications. Criteria 4 through 6 cover the access to sufficient learning opportunities, general education, and graduate education. And finally, criteria 7 and 8 cover the review of student learning opportunities involving third-party providers and the periodic assessment of the student learning opportunities. As we review each criterion in greater detail, you should be thinking about what policies, procedures, or other documentation an institution would have to demonstrate compliance with the standard, as well as with the corresponding requirements of affiliation and federal regulations. You should also be thinking about how and when an institution assesses or reviews those associated policies, procedures, and documents, and what changes have resulted from their assessment. Criterion 1 requires institutions to have certificate, undergraduate, graduate, and/or professional programs leading to a degree or other recognized higher education credential. That is, in demonstrating that the institution meets this standard, they are able to provide evidence to answer the following questions about all programs that lead to a degree or other higher education credential. How do you determine that program length is appropriate to the program's stated objectives? How do you know that programs are rigorous and coherent? How do you know that programs promote the synthesis of learning? For Criterion 2, institutions should provide evidence about the professionals who design, deliver, and assess educational programs, including information as applicable about how do they determine that the work is rigorous and effective as appropriate to the mission, goals, and policies of the institution. How does the institution know that the professionals are well qualified to support their designing, delivering, and assessing student learning experiences? How does the institution promote professional development for these professionals? What support does the institution provide for professional growth and innovation? That can be in the form of financial resources, but can be through other mechanisms of support as well, such as through a center for teaching or learning. And does the institution have clear policies for the evaluation and review of these professionals? For Criterion 3, institutions should provide evidence that program information is accurately described and accessible, and that students can understand and follow program requirements. Further, the institution needs to be able to demonstrate that students can complete or have the opportunity and necessary assistance to complete all program requirements within a reasonable time frame. Criterion 4 is looking for institutions to provide evidence of sufficient learning opportunities and resources to support both the institution's programs of study and students' academic progress. That is to say, institutions should be able to provide evidence about the kinds of opportunities and resources the institution makes available to students in support of their academic process. Institutions will likely have a variety of resources to highlight. These could include academic support services, such as tutoring, counseling, disability support services, and advising, as well as services for specific populations, such as those who may be on academic probation. Institutions should be identifying and evaluating all of the support mechanisms and resources in place to support academic programs, as well as students in their progress. It's equally important to think about how these services are adequate and communicated to the students. Criterion 5 addresses the need for institutions that offer undergraduate education to have a general education program. If appropriate and applicable to the institution, this standard will require that the institution be prepared to demonstrate how they determine that the general education program is of sufficient scope to expand the student learning experience, and how the institution ensures that students can demonstrate skills in all required areas. That is, are students able to complete fundamental coursework with learning outcomes that address essential skills in academic and professional writing, oral communication, mathematics, analytical reasoning, critical thinking, and ethical dimensions? For institutions that offer graduate or professional education, Criterion 6 is focusing on two areas: the opportunities for development of research, scholarship, and independent thinking, and that the faculty and/or other professionals engaged in the graduate level curricula have the appropriate credentials to do so successfully. Think about policies, procedures, processes, or documentation that may be available at the institution to show evidence of these 2 points. If appropriate, for Criterion 7, institutions should be providing evidence regarding student learning opportunities designed, delivered, or assessed by third-party providers. How is the institution able to ensure appropriate institutional review, oversight, and approval of the student learning opportunities that are associated with third-party providers? Third-party providers, that is, organizations or groups that are contracted by an institution to conduct a significant portion of activities that become part of the student's educational experience, can be part of an institution's innovative efforts to enhance the student experience. Accredited institutions are expected to conduct appropriate and adequate institutional review and have an approval process in place to ensure that all activities performed in their stead are regularly reviewed and evaluated. It is worth noting that some contractual arrangements with third-party providers require substantive change approval by the Commission. This is usually when an institution has contracted with an unaccredited entity to provide academic programming. These types of agreements, or contracts, are between an accredited institution within the Middle States membership and an unaccredited third party to outsource a portion of the institution's educational programs. The Commission's substantive change policy is triggered when that provider is offering 25% of one or more of the institution's educational programs, leading to an academic or professional degree, certificate, or other recognized educational credential. More information about those types of substantive changes can be found on the Commission's website. However, the self-study may require that institutions address other types of educational services through third-party providers, since every institution is responsible for activities carried out under the institution's name. Even when Commission approval through substantive change procedures is not required for that agreement, the institution, through self-study, will have an opportunity to ensure adequate and appropriate institutional review of third-party provider agreements and activities, including but not limited to tutoring, advising, counseling, admission services, recruiting or marketing, international student management, including English as a second language support, or other types of student support services. Services that, generally, may not fall within the umbrella of educational services could be those such as food or dining services. However, part of your assessment activities may include evaluating and assessing these services, for example, as part of your retention efforts, and may therefore lend to inclusion in the self-study. However, for those contractual agreements for educational-related services or student learning opportunities, the institution will be expected to address those within this standard or within others, even if a substantive change request to the Commission was not triggered due to the nature of the agreement. This topic will also be covered and applicable in Standards 4 and 5. For Criterion 8, institutions should be providing evidence that demonstrates the assessment of all student learning opportunities. That is, how does the institution ensure that a systematic and meaningful process for the assessment of all student learning opportunities is in place regardless of the level of the degree or credential, the instructional modality, the program schedule or pace, or the instructional setting? Further, it's important that the assessment activities are meaningful, useful, and cost-effective. Throughout this presentation, you have heard questions or statements that would lead you to think about the assessment practice as tied to each criterion. With periodic assessment embedded within every standard, institutional assessment practices continue to be critical. The Commission expects institutions to engage in sound assessment that leads to institutional improvement. The next slide provides you with basic, key questions relating to assessment within this standard. Again, assessment is embedded within every standard. Key questions regarding the assessment taking place relating to the design and delivery of the student learning experience. Is the process meaningful? To what extent do stakeholders trust what information is in front of them? How well are the assessments directly related to the design and delivery of the student learning experience? Is the process useful? After receiving the assessment information, how engaged are key institutional stakeholders in using the information to enhance the design and delivery of the student learning experience, to consider shifts in services or programs, or in other areas that could impact the design and delivery of the student learning experience? What are the ties from the assessment practice to the institutional planning, resource allocation, and institutional effectiveness evaluations? Is the process cost-effective and efficient? Is the process efficient enough to be worth the effort? To what extent has assessment become an ordinary process as opposed to being a burden? Can multiple stakeholders attest to how the assessment process has added value to their professional practice? These are important questions that, when answered, can enable institutions to continuously improve the student experience, ensuring that design and delivery of the student learning experience is maximized and sustained over time. Having reviewed all of the criteria, it's important to come back to and reflect upon the language of the standard. These criteria, taken together, specify the characteristics or qualities that encompass Standard 3. These criteria should be considered holistically within the context of institutional mission. Remember, the criteria do not represent a checklist. However, they embody the areas that the institutions are expected to address within the standard. The language of the standard should not be lost within the criteria, and institutions should demonstrate how they embody the language of the standard, as well as have policies, procedures, or other documentation relating to each criterion. Alongside the standard itself, these criteria should be considered holistically within the context of institutional mission. Let's focus on evidence for a moment. This slide provides you with a list of possible policies, procedures, or documentation that institutions may use to demonstrate that they meet this standard. This list does not imply that these are the required documents, nor does it imply that these are the only documents. What the Commission wants to convey is that it will be critically important for you and your colleagues to determine what evidence, in the form of policies, procedures, and other documentation, exists at the institution to provide evidence of effectiveness, institutional improvement, and compliance under this standard. Aligning institutional evidence alongside of each criterion lends to a gap analysis that can be done to determine where resources may need to be developed, better documented, or updated. The current practice and process at the Commission is to capture institutional evidence in what we call a documentation roadmap. This is a template document that provides institutions with a listing of the criteria with each standard, with an accompanying empty box for institutions to fill in with their evidence. It is a document that allows for an institution to conduct a gap analysis quickly and easily and serves as a tool for gathering evidence. Again, because the criteria are listed along with the requirements of affiliation, this template will promote resource and evidence gathering in an organized and methodical manner designed to support accreditation activities. The documentation roadmap template is available on the Commission's website. In addition to these videos on the standards, the Commission hosts a variety of activities, online and face-to-face, designed to keep you informed about our expectations, support the activities of member institutions, and provide you with avenues to collaborate with colleagues across the region. These include webinars, workshops, training for peer evaluators, as well as our annual conference. If you have ideas about specific opportunities that you would like to see the Commission support, please contact us to let us know. You can find additional information about the Commission through our website, including how to reach staff. If you have any questions about the information presented in this video, please contact your staff liaison at Middle States. Every member institution is assigned a staff liaison. To find out who's been assigned to your institution, visit the website, click on Institutions, find your institution listed, and then click on Detailed View. Other information about your institution is available through the link Statement of Accreditation Status below the Detailed View link.